and they really hurt, I think, our understanding of what's happening in Luke 16. They just really messed it up. So that's why I bring this up. Chapter divisions began in 1352-ish. Now, all these numbers are ish. Obviously, it didn't happen possibly specifically in that year other than the Gutenberg press. So the chapter divisions began in 1352 by a Stephen Langton. He was a college professor as well as something else, whatever the word is. So he began it in 1450 was the Gutenberg press. And the reason I have that on there, that's important, because in 1551, the chapter and verse divisions began in printed Bibles. Now, I put the Gutenberg press on there because if, for you, the same thing happened that happened to me, is I was like, wait a minute. I thought the Gutenberg press was two centuries later, if not more. But it wasn't. It started in 1450, and so 100 years later, you have chapter and verse divisions. Oh, sorry, Luke 16. Yeah, Luke 16. So the reason why all of this is helpful is, again, what we're going to find in Luke 16, where these chapter and verse divisions, I think, mess some stuff up. Also, and I didn't look this up, but the chapter and verse division titles, I didn't look that up whenever they started, but they can really be a challenge to our understanding of stuff, because as you're reading, you are subconsciously, I think, trusting that whoever put this stuff in there knows what they're talking about and labels it correctly. And oftentimes they can mess stuff up as well. Also, and lastly on this topic, is in the Hebrew Bible, the chapter, actually the book titles were not original. So the book of Genesis was not called the book of Genesis. They didn't call books anything. They just started. And so whenever you get to these book titles, much like the chapter titles, they're added much later, oftentimes centuries later, they're added. And so somebody puts on there what they think all this is about, which can either lead you helpfully or it can lead you in a not so helpful way. So this is both in terms of for your Bible study, but also for this specifically as we look at the rich man and Lazarus. So looking at Luke chapter 16 in context, what is happening, not just before it, but in this total process. And it probably could start in Luke 13, but we're going to start in Luke 14. So if you go to Luke chapter 14, and no, we're not going to spend any time on these specific stories, but I want you to notice what's happening, because when we get to the rich man and Lazarus, it's almost as if, I want you to imagine you're having a visit with someone, and you've been talking about something for 90 minutes. In the last 15 minutes, somebody walks in and begins to listen to your conversation. And it's not a private conversation, it's just one that you've had for 90 minutes with someone. They come in the last 20 minutes, and they're like, hey, what are y'all talking about? It's like, oh, holy cow, we talked about this and this and this, and it's kind of hard to wrap it up. When you get to the rich man and Lazarus, a lot's happened for Jesus and his teaching. And this specific story, the rich man and Lazarus, and today I'm probably going to get animated, because what's happening in the rich man and Lazarus is the result of almost 3 chapters of the events for the life of Jesus. So Luke chapter 14, Jesus is at a prominent Pharisee's home, and he's being carefully watched. Again, we're not going to read through the whole thing because it's probably going to take us 2 Sundays to get through all of this stuff anyway. So he's being carefully watched while he's in this prominent Pharisee's home, and he offers challenging teachings about the kingdom. So that's what most of chapter 14 is about. He's sharing stuff with them that they don't want to hear because it's not a part of their traditions and what they do, but he's bringing the kingdom in, and he's sharing some very different teachings to them. Luke chapter 15, actually, if you go Luke 14:28. Sorry, I think that's 28. No, that's 25. I legitimately can't see. Yeah, 25. Jesus begins talking about what it's like to be a disciple of Jesus, as opposed to the disciple of any random rabbi out there. And he lets them know there's a challenge to this, about how he expects his disciples to act. And he ends Luke 14 with the way that he is. Notice there where that is in the book of Matthew. Where do you find this same teaching in the book of Matthew? At the beginning. You are light of the earth, you are salt of the earth. If the salt loses saltiness, it's not good for anything. What do you do with it? You throw it away. Anyone who has ears to hear, let him hear and understand. So the point is everything that they're expecting to be taught by this rabbi, Jesus isn't doing. He's going in a completely different direction. So chapter 15 and verse 1, the tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of the religious law, what did they do? They complained. They were jealous that he was associating with such sinful people. Even, and this is the NLT that says it this way, what was he even doing with them? Eating. He was breaking bread. They were fellowshipping over food, and you didn't do that, especially as a rabbi. So, much like Luke chapter 14, they're watching him carefully. Everything Jesus does, these guys are watching him to catch him, to arrest him, to make him look like a fool, etc. And so instead of Jesus engaging with them, now Luke 15 is going to be very important to Luke 16 with the rich man and Lazarus. And if we're following along, we will see the pattern of what he's doing. Because he does the same thing with the parable of the lost sheep, lost coin, and the lost son. All three of them are going to be generally the same idea as the rich man and Lazarus. So, why does he tell these three parables, the sheep, the coin, and the lost son? What is the reasoning behind him going in this direction? Well, we get it in verse 1 and 2 of Luke 15. Tax collectors, other notorious sinners, he's eating with them. Why would they be notorious sinners? Or whatever the NIV says. Why are they notorious sinners? What's that? I mean, it's actually an easy answer. Everybody knows them. Everybody knows who they are. Maybe knows what they're doing. I've always been very curious in John 8 with the adulterous woman. The adulterous woman that gets thrown in front of Jesus as he's teaching. And the normal teaching there is that, it says that they found her. And the Greek has the idea there that they found them in the middle of having sex. And they grabbed her and pulled her and threw her in front of Jesus, not placed her, not said, Jesus, we got a question. They threw her. That's that scene. So what is her situation as she gets put in front of Jesus, as he's teaching about the kingdom? She's probably naked. And she just came from the sexual act with this guy, possibly without any blanket or whatever it is that they use. So their intention, that's where I was going with that. So how did they know that that was happening? How would you know that two people are having sex right then, and you can know where they are, you can grab her and bring her and take her and put her in front of Jesus? How did they know all that? They've been watching. So I want you to consider the mentality, the intention, the heart, the attitude, the evil of these people that are watching Jesus. They're watching him, waiting to see how he's going to respond. And it's not just making a fool of him in public in terms of conversation, but they now take a woman who is naked and they throw her. And again, they're not just bringing her and going, hey, what do you think? Make sure she's clothed. Throwing her. Dust kicks up. Yeah.
Kill her.
Yes.
The law was.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Which, if you look at the old law and what's happening there, and oftentimes the idea, and hold on to your thought, oftentimes the idea is, well, Jesus had mercy on her and Jesus was kind. No. I think, you know why Jesus did what he did? Because you had to have witnesses and you had to have the other dude. And they didn't have either. And so Jesus said, look, even if we wanted to stone her, you haven't fulfilled the law. Now, he didn't say that. He ended up doing something else, which is still very kind of unknown in scholarly topics. So the point I'm wanting to make is this is the scene we're here. We just don't have the woman. They're watching him carefully. So he gets into the story. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that they knew, which means they were probably ignoring their behavior.
Yes. Totally.
They told me
Totally.
this went on for a while.
Yes.
So she was their scapegoat.
Yes. So if you think about the intent, now as we're talking about all this, bring this whenever we get to Luke 16 with this story. Bring all of this insight to that story. So think about these men that are dressed religious. They know the law. And yet imagine the mentality of men that will do that to a woman. What do they think about her? They're just taking the trash out. They were just taking the trash out. They wanted Jesus so badly to stop him, to kill him, they were willing to do that. So Jesus doesn't confront them in just like a debate, if you want to call it that, a conversation. How does he teach them what they're acting like? Parables. He puts visuals up there for them. He gives them, what is it since you were little? What is a parable? Earthly story with heavenly meaning. So you take spiritual ideas and you put them right next to visuals that everybody knows. So Jesus says, this is just so cool. Verse 3, Jesus says, let me tell you a story. There's a guy with 100 sheep and he loses one. What's he do? His whole day, gone. Hold my calls. Goes to find the sheep. Lady loses her coin. What does she do? Turns the house upside down. Whole day gone to find that one coin. What is the whole lost son about? This boy that could be seen as a prostitute, could be seen as a filthy person in their culture, et cetera, because of what he does. Whenever he comes back, what does this father do? Welcomes him. The whole scene that happens there. So how does God react to these people? He loves them, brings them back, accepts them, all those kind of things. So when you get to Luke 15, that's what's happening there. I'm sorry, Luke 15. Yeah, both of those stories. Now, again, the reason why I bring up the whole chapter verse thing is when this stuff was written, this story was not Luke 15. Why do we have Luke 15? And again, it's an easy answer. So we can find it.
Someone
Says, hey, I want the parable of the lost sheep. So where do you go? You go to Luke in the 15th place, and you can find it. Instead of having to flip through, find it. So I don't want to sound like I'm hating on chapter and verse divisions, because they're very helpful. But they can also be very challenging in terms of the flow of stuff. Because if you're going to go straight to Luke 15 and go, ooh, I want to study that, you may not go back to Luke 14 and see what's happening. Why does he tell these parables? Well, because Jesus is a teacher and a rabbi. That's true. That's not why. He's involved in these constant interactions with these Pharisees who hate him and who want him dead. Now, again, I want you to consider as we go through these that these Jewish leaders aren't just bullies. Imagine the mindset. They want him dead. They want to kill him. And everywhere he goes, whatever he does, they're watching him. They're judging him. And they're watching how people respond to him. So, Luke 16:1. So hopefully that kind of gives you a better sense of what's happening. And when he comes to the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, when he finally unloads that, these others are going to seem a little trite. They're going to seem like Jesus just popped stuff out there. When he tells the rich man and Lazarus, man, he steamrolls it. He's like, okay, so just so you know, you guys are the rich man. Everybody I deal with that you hate, that you despise, is Lazarus. And we're going to see where Lazarus is in all these different images that Jesus brings in. So Jesus told this story to his disciples. Now, if he's telling his disciples, who's probably there? The Jewish leaders. They're everywhere he is. And they're listening, and they're watching. They're very careful about what he is doing. So he begins with this shrewd manager. And by the way, I don't know when the last time you read this story. It's odd. It just is. And I hope in terms of Bible study, in terms of not wanting to see God's word as odd, you do not allow that to keep you from saying, this is odd. So he tells this within this structure of dealing with these people. And also something else that Jesus does that I find interesting, because I know as a human that I would do this. Jesus oftentimes, even with this whole culture that's happening, he doesn't allow their presence or their pressure to keep him from doing what? Teaching about the kingdom. He's still going to teach people. He's still going to heal. He's still going to serve. In fact, in other places where a need is in front of him, and he knows he's got these people hawking over him, and a guy needs to be healed, he needs to see the glory of God, he needs to believe, etc., etc. What does Jesus do? He heals him, and he loves him, and he teaches him, even knowing these guys are watching his every move. One of the great attributes of our Messiah, our Savior, is that he is so totally keyed in on our needs and who we are. He's not worried about the dark forces of this world. His concern is for you. So he tells a story about this rich man with the shrewd manager. We talked about this a couple of months ago, that what this guy does, and we're like, why is that positive? Well, Jesus mentions that this manager approves of his shrewdness, which is the same cousin word we found in Genesis 3 with the serpent. The serpent was shrewd, and the idea of shrewdness there isn't bad or good, it's just a quality. It's the same idea in Matthew 10. You remember when he told his disciples to go out and all the different things they would do? And he told them to be what? as shrewd as a fox and as kind as a dove. So you be what the serpent was in Genesis 3. Because it's the same idea. It's not a bad thing. The serpent used it for evil. You also be what this guy was. Be shrewd. Be smart. Use your brain, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, don't be just gentle, nice people that get kicked around. Don't do that, because Jesus wasn't that. Jesus, have you ever noticed whenever you watch Jesus in his interactions with the Pharisees, what is one thing he is? He's shrewd. He's sly, in good ways, in ways that are good for him introducing the kingdom. So we now come to Luke chapter 16 in the story. Notice also, I didn't mention this, Luke 16 verse 14. After he tells this story, Luke 16:14, somebody tells me what it says there. Luke 16:14. Yeah, they scoffed at him. I think the NIV says that they sneered at him. Guys, they couldn't stand him. They literally hated this guy for what he stood for, what he taught, and he didn't follow the rules. He wasn't in step with them. What's that? He's very much so. Yes. Now, I want you guys to notice, how does it describe these Pharisees? And this is going to directly fall into this parable. What description does it give to the Pharisees? Love their money. They love their status. And they were probably very, what is the word? What am I trying to say? Something that you have that you're very careful with. You want it to stay safe. You want it to stay with you. And shrewd, yeah, they were very, goodness, it's ridiculous. They loved their money. They loved it very much. They loved their status. They love all this stuff. So they sneered at Jesus. Now, what sneering looks like, whether they made noises, I don't know. So then he said to him, now listen, and we're not even going to get to the parable this morning, but I wanted to set this up for when we actually look at it, you can have this awareness of what's happening. Listen to what he says to them first up, verse 15. And then he said, to them. Now, I hope you're listening to this as opposed to just a Bible study where this is what he says to them in public because they're watching him. You guys like to appear righteous in public, but Yahweh knows your hearts. What this world honors is detestable in the sight of God. So instead of just teaching it now and using a parable, which he did in Luke 15, what does he say to them like straight up in public? You guys are far away from God. God detests you. Wow. So continues here with its teachings. I think what's happening in verse 18, well, we're not going to get to the parable today. So I want to introduce this to you in terms of Bible study, in terms of sometimes we are very quick to good, effective at pulling scriptures out and applying them to stuff. And it's like, Luke chapter 16, verse 18 says that divorce is a sin. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying that's not what this is teaching. Why would he put this here? Does that not seem totally out of place? Why would he put that there? Because the Pharisees have done what to God? Divorced him. They committed adultery with their money. They committed adultery with their rituals. They committed adultery with God in every way. And so God has done what to them? Divorced them. Everything you do is detestable to God. So you are no longer God's representatives. That's what he's telling them here. Now, I'm surprised they didn't go grab him right there and pull him away. But what does Jesus now do? Tells them a parable. Here's another one. Let's do this. See, it's one thing I think we sometimes, we don't miss necessarily, but, oh, cool. Okay, that clock's wrong. Okay, we got time. One of the things I don't think that we do is sometimes we see Jesus. We kind of see him as this dove, this, be kind, be gentle, and it's kind of misrepresented how I've seen him in my life and how I've lived my life sometimes. Man, Jesus is bulldogging this here. He's not scared. He's not intimidated. And after he tells them in verse 18, essentially, look, man, you guys are done. You're not God's representatives anymore. God's divorced you. You're just empty vessels. Isn't that what John the Baptist told him? You guys are empty vessels. You got nothing. So he now tells them this parable. Jesus said, by the way, there was a certain man who was splendidly clothed in purple and fine linen, and who lived each day in luxury. So who was clothed like this, and who had money, and who lived in luxury? The Pharisees, the Jewish leadership. So out of the chute with this parable, he hits them. These are you guys. And they may be standing there going, that's us. That's us. Yeah, we're the first thing in his parable. We're that important. At his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores. So who would this Lazarus represent? A sinner, across the board. Publican, tax collector, prostitute, all of these people. And they were like, yep, that's where he belongs. Right there. Put him there. By the way, the word Lazarus here is not put in here by mistake at all. Jesus didn't just pick out a name. The word Lazarus means God is helper. So this guy that they despise, who is actually keen on him and watching him and helping him? Yahweh. So at the outset, Yahweh is taking care of this guy that these Jewish Pharisees can't stand. God is helper. The word is El-Ezer, and you may recognize that. Ebenezer in the Old Testament, Here I Raise My Ebenezer, the song that we sing, means the same thing, just a little different base word. And Eliezer, the high priest, means the same thing. God is helper. So Jesus uses that very specifically. This guy was full of abrasions. Now, I put chapter 14 and verse 2 there because all this begins, honestly, Luke chapter 14 and verse 2. On the Sabbath day, Jesus went to eat dinner in the home of a leader of the Pharisees, and the people were watching him closely. There was a man there whose arms and legs were swollen, had abrasions. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it permitted in the law for us to heal this guy on the Sabbath? They refused to answer him, and so Jesus touched the sick man, healed him, and sent him away. So now in this parable, Jesus pulls from something that possibly happened just a few hours ago. And you have this rich man, and then you have this Lazarus, and what is the Lazarus' condition? The guy that possibly happened just a few hours ago. Same situation. So up to this point, they're probably with Jesus and going, maybe finally he's going to, come to our side. And what did this Lazarus character want? He longed to eat the crumbs from the rich man's table. And in Matthew 15:27, do you remember the story of the Canaanite woman as she came to Jesus? And hey, I just want a blessing. And Jesus says, I can't give you what belongs to the manager's children. Do you remember what she said? Even the dogs get to eat what falls from the master's table. Now, there's a ton of levels going on in that one as well, both for Jesus and for this woman. So I feel like Jesus is also pulling from that, saying all he wanted was some crumbs from the master's table. And the master wouldn't even give him that. Also, the dogs would lick his wounds. It's supposed to be lick his wounds. In Leviticus 11:27, it says that dogs were unclean. And if a person was around the carcass of a dog, he was unclean and had to go to the priest to go through this whole stuff. So this Lazarus is in such a bad place that not only is he not getting fed, not only did he have wounds, but this unclean thing is coming over doing what? Touching him, saliva, licking, embracing him, getting very, very close to him, which was unclean. So everything so far, is yes, that's how things should be. So as Jesus sets this thing up, verse 22, this is where it gets really, really cool and interesting. Verse 22, finally the poor man died. And what was the outcome of his death? What happens? Yes. So messengers of God take God's helper, and where do they take him? Abraham's bosom, the great father of this nation. So this lowly person, this smudge of life, not only goes to Abraham's bosom, but how does he get there? God takes him there. Angels carry him there. The rich man also died, and what happens to him? He's just buried. That's all it says. He died, he was buried. And the word here for buried is interesting. It's kind of our word for cremation. He just got carried away. He's just done. So by this point, I would imagine these Jewish leaders are kind of going, okay, we were following you, but he gets carried away by angels. He goes to Abraham's bosom. What happens to us? Just dead. That's it. You're just dead. Nothing famous, nothing glittery, nothing exciting about this man. And hopefully as we continue to read through this, you're going to see what Jesus is doing and the visual that he's creating as a result of chapter 14 and chapter 15, what we find here. So the rich man then, he went to the place of the dead. Now, for our understanding, one of the things I want you to notice here is it is very easy for us to read New Testament with our worldview, right? So there are places and things that we have in our head that exist. If you go back 2,000 years and you read this like a Jew, they didn't have heaven and hell. They didn't have eternity. It just wasn't a thing in their brain. I'm not saying it wasn't a thing. That's not how they thought. Where did dead people go to the ancient Jew? Went to the netherworld. Went to Hades. They went to Sheol. That's where they existed. And we're going to look at, and we may not get there today, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, says they don't think. Nothing happens there. They just exist in Sheol, in Hades. Nothing's going on there. So if that's the case, why would Jesus create this visual for these Jewish leaders? That there's pain and there's fire and there's torment. Why would he do that? If in their brain, because Jesus isn't going to present something to them that they can't process. He's not going to present something to them and go, I don't know what he's talking about. Because he's wanting to get a picture to them of how separated from God they truly are, which is, I believe, what he does here. So, the rich man is now far away from Abraham. Who is this rich man's father? His whole claim to fame is Abraham. He's Abraham's son. Where do I have it? I don't have it here yet. In John chapter 8, toward the end of that whole story, the Jews claim, look, we don't need anything from you. We are Abraham's children. We belong to him. That's all we need. Of course, Jesus then says, Abraham, God can raise up children from Abraham. He doesn't need you. So we have this rich man far away from Abraham, while Lazarus, where is Lazarus? Where is this nasty, putrid, filthy man? He is, and the word for Abraham's bosom seems to kind of like be, if you have a kid or maybe your grandchild or your son or daughter, when they come sit next to you and you like pull them close to you, it's not like bosom in terms of like below the waist. It's all right here. And you bring your grandson or your son or daughter really close and you like squish him next to you. That's where Lazarus was. Abraham's bosom, right up close next to him. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is teaching, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who don't think they're greater than they are, which is where Lazarus was. Also, this idea of being far away, in Matthew 26:58, it describes whenever Peter is following Jesus, and he follows from a distance, same word. And in Mark chapter 8, verse 3, I don't remember what the reference there is, but the point I'm wanting to make is this idea of far away in their mind, all the same words. If I were to say, Andy over there makes a comment, and Andy's far away from me, so I have to maybe get closer to hear him. That's the idea there. There's a distance between this rich man and Abraham. They are not close. They are not connected. That's the idea that Jesus is getting across. And so the rich man, then verse 23, is in the netherworld. He's away from Abraham, and he's being shown his true character, the torment. The word there for torment is a touchstone, and it's what reveals. James chapter 1 and verse 3, whenever we go through challenges in life, what do the challenges do for us? They reveal our faith. They show the genuineness of our faith. And this rich man is being shown by Jesus in this story that his faith is trash, that he's not really connected to God. None of that is the case. Was that the second bell? Okay. Okay. Can you guys go for 5 more minutes? Or are you done? Okay. So the rich man is in the netherworld. He's in the place of the dead. And there, he's not connected to Abraham like he thought he was, and it also reveals his true character. The far away reveals his character. He's not connected with Abraham, and that's why Jesus stated, strangely to us, verse 18, about the whole marriage and divorce thing. Hades and Sheol in the New Testament is used 97 times. In Matthew 16:18, when Jesus says the gates of Hades will not overcome the church, the gates of this lower place. In other words, once Jesus dies, all these people are taken care of, whereas before they remain down there. And then there's these other verses. 1 Samuel 28:13, whenever Saul goes to the witch of Endor, and she calls on Samuel, and Samuel comes up from the earth. In their brain, he came up from the Sheol, from the Hadean realm. There's no torture. There's no challenges there. It's just where the dead went. So I believe, also Genesis 37:35, and then 2 other places I didn't put. When Jacob finds out about Joseph, that he's dead, he literally says that I will go to the earth to see Joseph one day. Because in his mind, Joseph is dead. So I'm going to go into Hades and see him again whenever I die. So it's not a place that they were scared of. And I go into all this so that you know, whenever it talks about fire and torment, it's the distance of this rich man with Abraham. That's this message that Jesus continues to give to them. You've been divorced, you're far away, you're not at Abraham's bosom, you're not connected to him at all. None of you guys are. And that was the intent of this parable. Okay, 3 more minutes. So he was in torment. The word torment there, which has really frustrated me that the translators use that, is the word touchstone. And if you have something that you put into a fire, you're putting it there to cleanse it, to bring out the impurities. The word shouldn't be torment. It should be touchstone. It's a character revealer. So the rich man is in this Hadean realm, and Jesus is revealing his character, which is terrible, which is trash. In the fire, the same word there is used in these places, Acts 7:30, where Stephen talks about the fire that was on the apostles' head at Pentecost. Revelation 1:14 talks about the fire that was next to Jesus to identify his character and his power, his authority. And then you have it in these other places as well. Verse 24, which I think is kind of funny, the rich man phones Abraham. Our word for phone, phono, is this word. He literally calls up Abraham and he's like, hey, can you help a brother out here? And with his call, he offers this, and that's Ecclesiastes 9, for those of you that are possibly taking notes. I thought I'd change that, but it didn't. So we'll stop here because there's a whole bunch more to get to, levels of this parable. So if you happen to be, which I know many of you are busy and you don't do this, but if you happen to think about and walk through this parable, there's a lot of levels and a lot of things going on here besides this rich man goes to hell and he's in torment, and so don't go to hell. That's not what's happening here, like, at all. And in terms of Bible study, if we're going to be honest with the text and genuine with what God is doing, you have to go back to chapter 14 and follow this whole event, this whole conversation. And when you get here, in verse 31, and we're going to continue all this next Sunday, Abraham said, if you won't listen to Moses and the prophets, you won't be persuaded if someone rises from the dead. There's nothing I can tell you people that's going to change your mind about who I am and what I'm here to do. So you're separated from God by choice. You're separated God by character. And you can kill me, which they ultimately will, and it's not going to change your character and how God ultimately sees you. So we will begin here next Sunday, Lord willing, and then we'll get through the rest of this, and there's a lot to get into and a lot of really, really cool stuff. Any closing thoughts before we close out? All right. Is this helpful for you guys? I hope so, because I really, really enjoyed this study, and it was a lot of fun for me to do. Let's close with a prayer. Father, I ask that you would help each one of us to be honest in our Bible study, and that we be diligent about being honest with what is being taught and what Jesus is doing. And in doing that, we sometimes have to go back a couple of chapters and pick up what's happening so that we can learn the lessons that are being taught. And I pray that you'd help us with that. In the great name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.